My mom sneered. You'll never measure up to your sister. I stood up and said, then why don't you ask her to cover your bills? The room went silent. You will never be as good as your sister. Those words, hissed by my own mother across a dinner table, were the match that finally lit a fire in my soul, after 2 decades of feeling invisible. The silence that followed when I stood up and spoke my truth? Oh, it was deafening. Hi, I'm Daniela. For as long as I can remember, my entire life felt like a constant comparison, a shadow I couldn't escape. On the outside, our suburban American family looked perfect. My dad, an engineer, brought home stability and little gifts. My mom, a meticulous accountant, kept our house flawless. And then there was Sarah, my older sister, 5 years my senior, the undisputed star. Sarah was the golden child, everything parents dream of. Beautiful straight-A student, effortlessly talented at piano and tennis. Teachers' faces would light up when they heard I was Sarah Williams' little sister, expecting the same brilliance. The problem? I wasn't Sarah. From my earliest memories, I was just average. My grades were BS. Not terrible, but definitely not Sarah spectacular. Math was a nightmare. I'd spend hours at the kitchen table, tears welling up, fighting with fractions that Sarah had aced years younger than me. But I had art. By 6, I filled sketchbooks, creating entire worlds. I'd proudly present these to my mom, desperate for the same glowing enthusiasm she showered on Sarah's achievements. I remember being 7. Sarah, 12, was on stage, performing Chopin at her piano recital. She was so poised, her fingers just danced across the keys. The audience erupted, my mom dabbing at tears of pure pride. The very next day, I finished a painting of our family, something I worked on for a whole week. I carried it to the living room, heart pounding. Mom, look what I made for you, I said, holding out my masterpiece. She glanced up barely. That's nice, Daniela. But why is the sky purple? Skies are blue, honey. And look, your father's arm is too long. You should pay more attention to proportions. My small hands gripped the painting tighter, my chest ached. I made the sky purple because I thought it looked pretty, I whispered. Well, it's not realistic. Sarah was drawing perfect, still lives by your age, she replied, already back to her book. I just took my painting, walked back to my room, and slid it under my bed. That's where a lot of my not good enough creations ended up, gathering dust. My elementary school graduation? Another gut punch. I'd worked so hard for those B's and a few A's. Walking to the car, my report card clutched in my hand, my mom scanned it. Sarah was getting straight A+ by your age, Daniela. If you just applied yourself a little more, you could do better. I just stared at the ground, watching my shiny new graduation shoes scuff against the pavement. All the pride I'd felt minutes ago just evaporated. Gone. My dad, though, he was my lifeline. He saw me, not the person I failed to be next to Sarah. He'd sit with me while I drew, asking about my worlds, even requesting drawings for his office. One night, after a particularly brutal day of comparisons, he came to my room, sat on the edge of my bed. You know, Danny, he said, using his special nickname for me. Not everyone is meant to shine in the same way. Some stars are bright and obvious, like the North Star. Others might seem less noticeable at first, but when you really look, they have colors and qualities all their own. I didn't fully get it then, but his words were a blanket of comfort. At least someone in my family saw value in me. But still, the message from my mom, subtly reinforced by everyone else, was crystal clear. I was living in Sarah's shadow and my light was dim. I learned to cope. I became an expert at smiling and nodding when people gushed about Sarah. I deftly changed the subject from grades. And deep down, I built a private world where I swore to myself, someday, somehow, I would find something I was brilliant at. Something that would make my mom look at me the way she looked at Sarah. But with each year, that promise felt harder to believe. The gap between us just kept widening. And while a part of me started accepting I might never measure up, another part desperately still yearned for her approval. By the time elementary school ended, my relationship with achievement was totally twisted. I craved it, but I also feared it, knowing whatever I did would be stacked against Sarah's gold standard. I held on to hope, though. Maybe middle school would be different. Maybe I'd finally shine. That hope, like so many others, proved far more complicated than my young heart knew. Then came the summer before 8th grade. Sarah got into Harvard. Full scholarship. Our house transformed into Harvard Central. Crimson and white everywhere. My mom, beaming, told friends, "We always knew Sarah was destined for greatness." From the moment she spoke in full sentences at 18 months. I was 13, navigating that awkward age, feeling utterly invisible in my own home. That night, as everyone fawned over Sarah, I slipped away, cranked up my music and sketched aggressively in my notebook, pencils tearing through the paper. Something shifted in me that fall. The eager-to-please student vanished, replaced by a girl who just stopped seeing the point. My respectable B's plummeted to C's, even D's. Each report card brought more disappointment, more frustration from my mom. Eventually, I was hauled into the guidance counselor's office. My mom had set it up. She sat there, prim, stiff, hands folded, expression grim. "Daniela has always been a bit of an underachiever compared to her sister," she announced to Mr. Wilson, as if I wasn't right there. Sarah was class president by this age, preparing for AP courses. Mr. Wilson, bless him, tried to pivot. Every student has their own journey, Mrs. Williams. Let's talk about Daniela's interests and strengths. But my mom wasn't interested. The meeting ended with a behavior improvement plan, and privileges stripped away. But you know what? Around that time I found a new outlet. A new rebellion. The community center offered weekend art workshops. I dove into urban art, fashion sketches, mixed media. It was worlds away from my mom's idea of real art. My wardrobe changed too. Out went the preppy stuff. And came thrift store finds, band tees, accessories that made me stand out. I even dyed a purple streak in my hair. That earned me 2 weeks grounding and an endless lecture. What will people think? Sarah never went through a phase like this. Maybe that's the problem. I shot back. Maybe I'm tired of hearing what Sarah would do. My social circle shifted too. I gravitated towards other creative outcasts, people who didn't fit the mold. My best friend Emily, with her green-tipped hair and passion for photography, became my absolute lifeline. She was everything my mom disapproved of, which only made our friendship stronger. Your mom has Sarah goggles on, Emily told me one afternoon, perched on the bleachers avoiding going home. She can't see past her perfect firstborn to realize she has another awesome daughter, who's just awesome in different ways. Those words stuck with me. They finally gave me a way to understand our family without making me the problem. Even with my academic apathy, my art kept growing. So when high school announced a student fashion design competition my sophomore year, I worked for weeks in secret, staying late at school, sketching at Emily's house. I poured everything into it. The day of the announcement, my heart was a drum. When my name was called first place winner, I swear I floated. My design, a vintage-inspired dress with modern architectural twists, blew the judges away. That evening I burst through the front door, trophy and certificate in hand, ready for my mom to finally be proud. "Mom!" I yelled, finding her chopping vegetables. "I won the design competition." She looked up, more confused than pleased. "The what?" "The fashion design competition at school." "Look." I held out the trophy. She put down her knife, wiped her hands, and examined my prize with a frown. "I didn't even know you entered a competition. When did you work on this? Is this why your algebra grade slipped to a C- last month?" My heart just sank. "Does it matter? I won, Mom. Out of the whole school." She handed the trophy back with a sigh. "Daniela, if you spend half the time on your academics that you do on these art projects, you might actually have a future like your sister." Sarah was preparing for college entrance exams by your age, not wasting time on hobbies. Something snapped inside me. "It's not a hobby. It's what I'm good at. What I love. Why can't you see that?" "What I see is potential being wasted," she replied, cold as ice. "These little creative projects won't get you into a good college or provide a stable future. They're not little projects to me." I shouted, my voice cracking. "And maybe I don't want Sarah's future. Maybe I want my own." It was our first real explosion. The first time I'd ever openly challenged her vision for me. I ran to my room, slammed the door, clutching my trophy, sobbing into my pillow. Later Dad came in, sat on the edge of my bed, a gentle hand on my shoulder. "She just wants what's best for you," he said softly, but I heard the doubt in his voice. "No," I choked out through tears. "She wants what's best for Sarah. She wants another Sarah." That night, the unspoken tension between us finally found its voice. And there was no going back to polite pretending. Things only got more strained. Sarah graduated summa cum laude from Harvard, then landed a job at a prestigious Boston law firm. Our house? It became a shrine to Sarah's success again. Framed diplomas, offer letters on the fridge, endless calls from relatives praising my parents for their exceptional daughter. Meanwhile, I was quietly preparing for my graduation, applying to art and design schools, desperately trying to map out a future that felt like mine. But with every step I took, the weight of comparison grew heavier, threatening to crush the fragile identity I was building. Then my college acceptance letters arrived. Good news from several art schools, even a partial scholarship to the state university's respected design program. It wasn't Harvard, sure, but it was exactly where I wanted to be. I pictured my mom's reaction. "State university?" she said, eyebrows raised, scanning the letter. "I suppose it's better than community college." Though Sarah had offers from Ivy League schools across the board. Predictably underwhelming. But here's the thing. It hurt less than I expected. Maybe I was finally developing an immunity to her constant comparisons. Or maybe I just reached my limit of caring about her approval. Moving into my dorm room felt like pure liberation. My small bright room, shared with a music major who was always in practice rooms, became my sanctuary. For the first time ever, I could decorate my way, work on my designs whenever I wanted, and just exist without Sarah's looming shadow. Those first few weeks of college were overwhelming, but also exhilarating. I was surrounded by people who got me, who valued creativity, original perspectives. In my intro to fashion design class, I met Professor Linda Carter, a former designer for major fashion houses. After our third class, she asked me to stay. My stomach clenched. Conditioned always to expect criticism. Your preliminary sketches show real promise, Daniela, she said, flipping through my work. There's a distinctive point of view here. Raw, but with strong instincts for proportion and unexpected detail. I just stood there frozen. Praise felt so alien. Thank you, I finally managed. I see a lot of students with technical skills, she continued, but fewer with authentic vision. Keep developing this voice. It's what will set you apart. I walked out of that classroom feeling taller. Like her words had physically unhunched my shoulders. Someone who knew what they were talking about saw value in my work, on its own merits, not compared to anyone else. I found my rhythm. I joined the university's fashion society, made friends who shared my passion. My style evolved. Structured tailoring, unexpected materials, street art influences. Professor Carter encouraged it all. Sophomore year, I met Jason in a color theory class. Graphic designer. Quiet but with a sharp wit. Unlike any guy I dated, Jason was genuinely interested in my work, my ambitions. He'd sit for hours in the studio while I draped fabric, offering thoughtful feedback, bringing me coffee during late-night sessions. Our relationship blossomed, built on friendship and respect. He never made me feel like I was competing for his attention or validation. I didn't even realize that was possible in a relationship. But despite all this positive change, those weekly phone calls with my mom were still an exercise in extreme patience. She'd ask perfunctory questions about my classes, then inevitably pivot to Sarah's latest triumph. Sarah just closed her first major case. The partners are already talking about fast-tracking her career. Or, Sarah and Michael just put a down payment on a condo in Beacon Hill. At her age, can you imagine? When Sarah got engaged to Michael, a corporate attorney from her firm, my mom spent our entire call detailing the ring, the proposal, the family connections. You really should talk to your sister about how she found such a good match, she'd suggest. Maybe she could introduce you to some of Michael's colleagues. I'd glance at Jason, sketching obliviously at my desk. I'm seeing someone, Mom, I'd say. I've mentioned Jason several times. Oh, the art student, she'd reply, her tone dripping with what she thought of that. Well, that's nice for now, dear. Always the implied temporariness, the transitional experimental phase. By junior year, I was a standout in the design program. My work was in showcases. Professor Carter picked me for a competitive TA position. I was building a portfolio, looking at internships. Then came the National Student Design Competition. Huge deal. Cash prize, industry exposure. I spent months on my collection, pushing myself to create something innovative and wearable. Jason and my friends cheered me on, celebrated every tiny victory. The night before I submitted my final portfolio, my phone rang. Mom. Weekly check-in. Hi, Mom, I answered, pinning a final piece onto my presentation. Bored. Daniela. Did you hear about Sarah's promotion? Youngest senior associate in her firm's history. That's great, I said automatically, the response practically hardwired. We're just so proud. Your father and I were saying how all those late-night studying really paid off. Then the pause. I knew what was coming. How are your classes going? Still doing those fashion projects? I took a deep breath. Actually, I'm finishing my entry for the National Student Design Competition. It's a really big deal in the industry. Oh, she said, her voice flat. Well, don't get your hopes up too high, honey. These creative fields are so competitive. And not everyone has natural talent like your sister has for law. There's no shame in being realistic about your prospects. I closed my eyes, phone pressed to my ear, surrounded by the tangible evidence of months of work. Thanks for the encouragement, Mom, I said, not even trying to hide the sarcasm. I'm just being honest, Daniela. Not everyone can be exceptional like Sarah. Sometimes being average is perfectly fine. After we hung up, I sat there motionless, her words echoing. Then with deliberate movements, I returned to my work, channeling the hurt into a final ferocious push. As I completed the last details, I made a promise to myself. Win or lose, I would no longer measure my worth through my mother's eyes. It was time. Time to be the authority on my own value. I graduated from State University with honors in design. It felt monumental to me. My mom? That's nice, dear. Before she pivoted back to Sarah's latest courtroom victory. The graduation itself was fine. Dad beamed, Sarah even came. Though Mom managed to slip in at least 3 times that Sarah graduated summa cum laude from Harvard. Armed with my degree and portfolio, I landed an entry-level position at Meridian Designs, a small but respected studio making costumes for indie films. The pay was minimal, barely covering my half of rent, but it was my foot in a notoriously tough door. Those first few months in the professional world? A brutal reality check. The glamour I'd imagined evaporated, replaced by tedious alterations, insane deadlines, impossible budgets. Most days I was just sourcing materials or making tiny tweaks. Meanwhile, Sarah got promoted again. Youngest partner in her firm's history. Another celebration. Champagne, catered food. I plastered on a fixed smile, a growing knot in my stomach. Her corner office with a Boston skyline view contrasted starkly with my cramped workroom in a converted warehouse. "How's the costume job?" Sarah asked at the party, trying to be interested. "It's design, not just costumes," I corrected automatically. "And it's challenging, but I'm learning a lot." She nodded. "Well, everyone has to start somewhere. I'm sure you'll move up eventually." Even from Sarah, who I truly believe meant well, that comment stung. It always implied my path was less valid, a mere stepping stone to something that looked more like her success. The financial reality hit hard. While Sarah was buying her first home, I was counting pennies for rent, juggling credit card payments. Jason and I were steady, his graphic design career doing better than mine. But the stress of insecurity started to fray us. "Maybe you should consider a more commercial direction," he suggested one night after I'd vented about work. "Nothing wrong with designing for retail. At least it pays better." "That's not why I got into this," I shot back, frustrated that even he didn't seem to understand. "I don't want to create disposable fashion that ends up in landfills." "I know, but you also need to live," he said gently. "You can barely afford groceries right now." The argument escalated, touching on deeper issues. Ambition, practicality, our different visions of success. It was our first serious fight. We reconciled, but something had shifted. 2 months later, after more tension and arguments, we decided to take a break. It became permanent. Heartbroken, questioning everything, I just threw myself into work. Staying late, volunteering for the hardest projects, spending weekends developing my own designs. I refused to give up on the vision that had sustained me through all those years of doubt. Then, unexpectedly, came the turning point. Meridian was contracted for an experimental theater production, and because of budget and timeline, I got more responsibility than usual. I designed these incredible transformative garments that could be modified on stage to show character evolution, using techniques I developed in my personal work. Opening night, I stood nervously in the back of the theater, watching my designs come to life. The audience gasped during a particularly dramatic transformation scene. At the after-party, the director publicly singled me out. "The costumes were characters themselves tonight," he said, raising a glass. "Daniela Williams has created something truly special here." A local fashion blogger approached me for an interview. The article she published caught the eye of Emma Wilson, a well-established designer, known for her avant-garde, sustainable creations. To my shock, Emma emailed me directly, interested in my work, invited me to show her my portfolio. Our coffee meeting turned into a 3-hour deep dive into design philosophy. By the end, she offered me a position on her small, influential design team. The salary was still modest, but it was a huge step up professionally and financially. More importantly, it was validation from someone whose opinion I deeply, deeply respected. I called my parents that evening, bursting to share what felt like my first real breakthrough. "Emma Wilson?" my mom repeated after my excited explanation. "I've never heard of her. Is this still costume work?" "No, Mom. This is high-end fashion design. Emma's been featured in Vogue, worn on red carpets. This is a really big deal." "Well, that sounds nice," she said, her tone suggesting the exact opposite. "I suppose you were lucky to meet her at that theater thing." "It wasn't luck," I snapped, my excitement curdling into that familiar disappointment. "She sought me out because she was impressed by my work." My mom just hummed non-committally. "Speaking of impressive work, did Sarah tell you about her latest case? Representing that tech company in the big antitrust suit? It's been in all the papers." I ended the call shortly after. I promised myself this was the last time I'd ever seek her approval. 10 minutes later, Dad called back. "I just wanted to say congratulations, Danny," he said warmly. I looked up Emma Wilson. "Her designs are remarkable, different like your work. I'm proud of you for catching her eye." His support meant everything. A small island of validation in a vast sea of indifference. But even as I prepared for my new job, I couldn't shake the question. Would I ever stop measuring myself against Sarah's impossible standard? Would my mother ever see my path as anything but a pale shadow of my sister's brilliance? 6 months into my amazing new job with Emma Wilson, an invitation landed that filled me with equal parts obligation and utter dread. My mother's 60th birthday dinner. Normally I'd find an excuse, but Dad's voice on the phone had that tone. The one that said my absence would genuinely hurt him. "It'll mean a lot to your mother, Danny," he'd said. "Sarah and Michael are coming from Boston. The whole family." So there I was one crisp autumn Friday evening, pulling my second-hand car into the driveway of my childhood home, steeling myself for the inevitable comparisons and subtle put-downs that always came with family gatherings. I'd brought a vintage silk scarf, restored it myself, thoughtful within my budget. I knew it would pale next to whatever extravagant gift Sarah would undoubtedly bring. The house was exactly as I remembered. Meticulously clean, tastefully decorated. As I walked up the path, I could hear their voices. That familiar cadence of family conversation that always brought a strange mix of comfort and anxiety. Sarah opened the door. Polished, put together, in a tailored dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. But her smile was genuine as she pulled me into a hug. Daniela, you look great, she said, stepping back. I love your outfit. Is that one of your designs? I nodded, surprised by her interest. It was my own creation. Simple, distinctive, architectural details, repurposed vintage fabric. The structure is amazing, she continued. You have to tell me about your new job. Before I could answer, Mom appeared. Daniela, you're finally here, she said, offering her cheek for the obligatory kiss. We were about to start appetizers without you. Sorry, traffic was heavy, I mumbled, though I'd been precisely on time. Happy birthday, Mom. Dinner started as expected. Dad had made her favorite. Conversation revolved around Sarah's work, her life with Michael in Boston. I picked at my food, offering polite answers when asked directly, fading into the background like I always did. Then over the main course, Sarah cleared her throat. She exchanged a meaningful glance with Michael. Actually, we have some news, she announced, her face glowing. I've been promoted to lead counsel for the firm's international division. My parents erupted in congratulations. Mom actually clapped her hands. Sarah's smile widened. And we're expecting. I'm 3 months pregnant. The news of my impending niece or nephew completely eclipsed the career announcement. My mom's eyes welled up as she rushed to hug Sarah. Dad beamed with grandfatherly pride. I offered my sincere congratulations. Genuinely happy for her. Despite that familiar twinge of inadequacy her achievements always sparked. A toast, Dad declared, raising his glass to Sarah, Michael, and the newest member of our family. We all raised our glasses. Mom dabbed her eyes. My first grandchild, she choked out. Sarah, you've always made us so proud. And now this. It's perfect. As the excitement settled, and the conversation turned to baby showers and nurseries, I found myself wanting to contribute something positive. After years of disappointment, some childish part of me still craved her approval. I actually have some news too, I said during a lull. All eyes turned to me. A nervous flutter in my stomach. One of my designs has been selected for New York Fashion Week. For the Emerging Designers Showcase. A beat of silence. Then Sarah spoke. Daniela, that's incredible. New York Fashion Week is huge. Dad reached over, squeezed my hand. Congratulations, Danny. When is it? We should all try to be there. It's next month, I replied, warmed by their reactions. It's just one piece in a group showcase, but it's a big opportunity for exposure. I looked at Mom, hoping for some sign of enthusiasm. Her expression was polite, but utterly devoid of the animation she'd just shown. Is that so? She asked. Well, that sounds nice. Is it the main event, or some sort of sideshow? The dismissiveness in her tone was so familiar. It almost didn't hurt anymore. Almost. It's part of the Emerging Designers platform, I explained, keeping my voice even. Many successful designers got their start there. She hummed, her interest clearly waning. I suppose any exposure is good in your field. She turned back to Sarah. Now about the baby shower. I was thinking we could host it here, maybe a garden theme for spring. The conversation moved on as if my news had been a minor interruption. I fell silent again, pushing food around my plate, wondering why I'd even bothered. Later, in the living room with coffee and cake, my parents started discussing their 40th wedding anniversary. We're thinking of renting a venue, Dad explained. Nothing too elaborate, but something nice. Those places charge a fortune, Mom fretted. The gardenia room's minimum is $3,000, not including food or drinks. I could contribute, Sarah offered immediately. Consider it part of your anniversary gift. That's very generous, sweetie. My mom beamed. Michael's firm must be treating you well. We're comfortable, Sarah acknowledged modestly. And we want to help make it special. Mom turned to me, eyebrows raised expectantly. And what about you, Daniela? Will you be contributing as well? The question was loaded. She knew my financial limitations, never bothering to understand they were a normal part of starting a creative career. I can help with the planning and design elements, I offered. I could create custom invitations and decorations that would cost a fortune if you hired someone. My mom's expression tightened. I was thinking more of financial assistance, Daniela. Your sister is offering to help with the actual expenses. I know what Sarah's offering, I replied, an edge creeping into my voice. I'm offering what I can. Which isn't much, my mother said with a dismissive wave. The room went silent. Awkward. Michael suddenly found his coffee intensely fascinating. Dad shot Mom a warning look, which she ignored. I don't understand why you insist on struggling in this fashion hobby when you could have pursued something practical, she continued. Your sister was practical, and look at her now. Senior position, beautiful home, baby on the way. You could have had all that too if you had applied yourself properly. The heat rushed to my face. Fashion design is not a hobby, Mom. It's my career. A career I've worked incredibly hard for. Working hard at the wrong thing is still wasted effort, she replied, her voice chilling. Let's be honest, Daniela. You will never be as good as your sister. I think I've finally accepted that fact. Perhaps you should too. The words hung in the air like a physical slap. 20 years of comparisons, disappointments, diminished achievements. all crystallized in that one brutal statement. I looked around. Sarah looked mortified. Dad was stunned into silence. Mom sat primly, her expression suggesting she'd merely stated an obvious truth. But something shifted inside me. The hurt was still there, sure, but it was overshadowed by a sudden, astonishing clarity. I stood up slowly, my hands steady despite the storm inside me. If I will never be as good as Sarah, I said, my voice calm, clear, cutting through the silence, then perhaps you should ask her to pay your bills. The silence was absolute. My mother's mouth opened slightly in pure shock, her cheeks flushing. Excuse me, she finally managed. You heard me, I continued, finding a strength I didn't know I possessed. If Sarah is your measuring stick for success and value in this family, then direct all your expectations her way. Ask her to fund your anniversary party. Ask her to validate your life choices. Ask her to fulfill whatever dreams you had that I apparently keep failing to meet. I took a deep breath. Years of suppressed thoughts finally finding their voice. For 20 years I've tried to make you see me, not as a comparison to Sarah, but as my own person with my own talents and dreams. But you have never been interested in who I actually am, only in who I failed to be. That's not true, my mother protested weakly. I just want what's best for you. No, I shook my head. You want what's best for you. You want the prestige of 2 Harvard-educated, conventionally successful daughters you can brag about. But that's not who I am. And it's not who I want to be. I turned to Sarah. Her eyes were wide, a mix of surprise and what looked like dawning respect. Sarah, I love you and I'm genuinely happy for your success. But Mom has used you as a weapon against me my entire life, and I can't pretend anymore that it doesn't hurt. To my absolute shock, Sarah stood up and moved to my side. She's right, Mom, she said quietly. You've always compared us. And it hasn't been fair to Daniela. Do you know how much pressure I've felt, knowing you were using my achievements to make her feel inadequate? Do you have any idea how that's affected our relationship as sisters? My mother looked truly confused, as if the idea that her behavior had damaged both her daughters had never, ever occurred to her. I just always pushed you both to excel, she said defensively. No, my father finally spoke, his voice unusually firm. You pushed Sarah to excel in ways you valued, and you pushed Daniela to be Sarah. That is not the same thing, Elizabeth. The use of her first name, something Dad rarely did, underscored the gravity of the moment. Mom looked at him, betrayal etched across her features. I've sat by too long watching this dynamic, he continued. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. But I was wrong. I should have spoken up years ago when I saw how your constant comparisons were hurting Daniela. My mother's face crumpled slightly. Was it remorse? Or just the shock of being confronted? I couldn't tell. I felt suddenly utterly exhausted. Decades of suppressed emotion, now the dam had burst. I think I need some air, I said, moving towards the front door. No one tried to stop me. I stepped outside into the cool evening, closing the door behind me with a soft click that felt like the period at the end of a very long, complicated sentence. I sat on the front steps, breathing deeply, feeling simultaneously lighter and terrified. I had finally said the words I'd held back my whole life. But what would happen next? Was this the end of my relationship with my mother? Had I irreparably damaged our family? Or was there, however small, a chance this confrontation could lead to healing? As I gazed up at the emerging stars, I realized something. Regardless of what came next, I had finally stood up for myself, for my worth. For the first time, I refused to accept the narrative that I was a lesser version of my sister. Whatever came next, I would face it as Daniela, on my own terms, no longer defined by who I was not. The week after my outburst at Mom's birthday, it was a blur of emotions. Vindication, guilt, relief, anxiety. I buried myself in work, so grateful for the Fashion Week demands that kept my mind occupied. But at night, I'd replay the scene over and over. I hadn't spoken to anyone in my family. Dad called twice, leaving gentle voicemails, saying he was there when I was ready to talk. Mom's silence was deafening, but not surprising. What did surprise me was a text from Sarah on the 6th day. Can we talk? Just us. We met at a cafe. She was in town for business but had extended her stay just to see me. She'd already ordered my usual vanilla latte. How are you feeling? I asked, gesturing to her midsection. Morning sickness is finally tapering off, she smiled. But I didn't ask you here to talk about the baby. I wanted to talk about what happened at Mom's birthday. I tensed, bracing myself for criticism. Instead, Sarah reached across the table, placed her hand on mine. I'm sorry, she said, her eyes so sincere. I am so sorry I never realized how much pain you were in, or how my achievements were being used against you. I should have seen it. Her unexpected apology completely disarmed me. It wasn't your fault, I said automatically. You were just living your life, being successful. Maybe, she acknowledged. But I wasn't being a good sister. I knew Mom compared us, but I convinced myself it was normal, or that it would push you to find your own path. I never considered how damaging it really was. We talked for nearly 3 hours. Truly communicated. Probably for the first time in our adult lives, Sarah shared her own struggles with Mom's expectations, the immense pressure to maintain that perfect image, and to my shock, her genuine admiration for my creativity and determination. "You know what's ironic?" she said, stirring her third cup of tea. "I used to be jealous of you." I nearly choked on my coffee. "Jealous of me? That's absurd." "Not at all," she insisted. "You always knew exactly what you wanted to do. You had this passion for design from the time you were little, and you never wavered. I fell into law because it was expected what I was good at. But I never had that certainty, that fire you have." Her words fundamentally shifted my understanding of our family dynamic. I'd always seen Sarah as the golden child, effortlessly perfect. The idea that she might have envied my life? It had never crossed my mind. "So what happens now?" I asked eventually. "With Mom, I mean." Sarah sighed. "She's hurt and confused. I don't think anyone has ever challenged her worldview like that. Dad's finally standing up to her too. They're having a lot of conversations behind closed doors." As we hugged goodbye, a genuine heartfelt hug, I felt the first stirrings of hope. Maybe our relationship as sisters could finally become something healthier. Something built on mutual respect instead of competition. 2 days later, Dad showed up at my studio during lunch. I texted him the address, but I was still surprised to see him. He navigated the creative chaos, looking a little out of place in his button-down, but immensely proud as he examined sketches and fabric samples. "This is where the magic happens, huh?" he said, carefully picking up a design board for my Fashion Week piece. "Something like that," I replied, self-conscious but pleased. "It's usually not quite this messy." We went to a nearby sandwich shop. He asked thoughtful questions about my work, then steered the conversation to the real reason for his visit. "I owe you an apology, Danny," he said solemnly. "I should have protected you more. I knew what was happening, how your mother's comparisons were affecting you, but I took the path of least resistance. I'd comfort you privately instead of challenging her publicly." "You were always my supporter, Dad," I said, meaning it. "I don't know if I would have survived that house without you." "Support isn't enough when injustice is happening," he replied, his eyes saying, "I failed you by not being your advocate. I'm trying to make up for that now with your mother." He explained that my confrontation had forced both of them to face painful truths about their parenting and their marriage. Mom wasn't having an easy time accepting her role, but she was at least starting to question her behavior. "She may never fully understand," he warned. "She comes from a family where achievement was the only measure of worth. But she does love you, Daniela, even if she has a terrible way of showing it." The night before my Fashion Week debut, as I was making final adjustments, my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. The first direct communication since the birthday dinner. "Good luck tomorrow. I know this is important to you." No gushing praise, no apology, but it was something. A tiny acknowledgement of my world on my terms. I replied with a simple thank you, and decided small steps were still progress. The morning of the showcase, I was a bundle of nerves and excitement. My piece, a deconstructed evening gown that transformed on stage to reveal different structures, represented everything I had worked for. Helping my model into the complex garment, I tried not to think about who might be in the audience. This moment was about my work, my vision, not family approval. The showcase was a blur of lights, music, adrenaline. Backstage, I watched my creation move down the runway, the audience murmuring appreciatively. Emma squeezed my shoulder. I felt a surge of professional pride, finally untainted. It was only later during the reception that I saw them. Dad tall, easy to spot. But it was Mom beside him that stopped me mid-sentence. And next to her, Sarah and Michael. All of them scanning the room looking for me. Emma noticed. "Family?" she asked, perceptive as ever. I just nodded, suddenly nervous in a way the industry pros hadn't made me. "Go," she encouraged. "I'll cover for you." I made my way through the crowd. Dad saw me first, waving. As I approached, I could see Mom was uncomfortable. Rigid posture, tight smile. "You came," I said, looking right at her. "We wouldn't miss it," Dad replied, embracing me warmly. "Your work was magnificent, Danny. Truly special." Sarah hugged me next. "That dress was incredible. The way it changed. I've never seen anything like it." Mom stood slightly apart, taking in the unfamiliar scene. Finally, she looked directly at me. "It was very creative," she said, her tone careful, like she was translating a foreign language. The audience seemed quite impressed. Coming from her, that was practically a standing ovation. Then I noticed. She was wearing the vintage scarf I'd given her for her birthday. A small silent gesture that spoke volumes. "Thank you for coming," I said sincerely. "All of you. It means a lot." Dad mentioned Emma Wilson had spoken to them, praising my talent. I saw something flicker across my mother's face. Maybe the beginning of a realization. My path, so different from Sarah's, might hold legitimate value after all. "Is she important in your field?" Mom asked hesitantly. "Very," I replied, letting her sit with that knowledge. We didn't have a dramatic reconciliation that night. No tearful apologies. But as Mom prepared to leave, she paused, looked at me with an expression I'd rarely seen. "Your father and I would like you to come to dinner next week," she said. "To talk if you're willing." It was a small opening, a narrow crack in a very thick wall, but it was more than I'd expected. "I'll check my schedule," I replied, neither committing nor refusing. Sarah lingered. "She's trying," she said quietly. "In her own way." Her coming tonight? That was a big step for her. I nodded. Decades of entrenched behavior wouldn't change overnight. "One step at a time," I agreed. Returning to the reception, I was surprised. The anxiety that always came with thoughts of my family had diminished. Whether or not my mother ever fully accepted my choices, I had started to truly value them myself. And maybe, just maybe, that was the most important piece all along. A year after that explosive birthday dinner, so much in my life had changed. New York Fashion Week exposure led to incredible connections, eventually allowing me to leave Emma's team, with her full blessing, to start my own small design studio. It wasn't an empire, just a modest space with 2 part-time assistants. But it was mine, built on my vision. My designs, praised for their innovation and sustainability, started getting features in industry publications. The financial stability I'd craved for so long was finally within reach, even if my lifestyle was still simple compared to Sarah's. My family relationships also evolved in both expected and surprising ways. Dad and I grew closer than ever. His pride, now openly, frequently expressed. He became a regular at my studio, genuinely interested in my creative process and the business side of things. Sarah and I developed a relationship that, yes, still had awkward moments but was now built on mutual respect, not competition. The birth of my niece, Lily, brought a new beautiful dimension. I designed a special christening gown for her, incorporating family heirlooms. It moved Sarah to tears. "I want Lily to know her Aunt Daniela," she told me during one of our now regular sister lunches. "To know that success comes in different forms, and finding your passion is what matters most." The most complex evolution, predictably, was with Mom. Our relationship remained a work in progress, often 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That first dinner after Fashion Week was tense but productive. The first of many conversations where we truly tried to understand each other. "I never intended to hurt you," she'd said that night, clutching her water glass. "I thought I was motivating you by constantly telling me I wasn't as good as Sarah." I'd pushed back, trying to keep my tone level. "By showing you what was possible," she'd replied, genuinely believing her own logic. "Sarah set such a high standard. I thought it would inspire you." It was painfully clear we saw the same experiences through entirely different lenses. My mother grew up in a household where achievement was love, where comparison was motivation. Breaking through decades of that conditioning wasn't simple. There were still moments of thoughtless comparisons, dismissals that stung, but there were also new moments. Moments where she visibly tried to understand my world on its terms. She started asking questions about design, awkward at first, then with genuine curiosity. She even framed a sketch I'd given her, displaying it prominently in their living room, right alongside Sarah's law school diploma. A small but profoundly meaningful gesture of equivalence. And in my personal life, an unexpected reunion. 6 months after Fashion Week, I literally bumped into Jason at an art exhibition, spilling his drink in a scene straight out of a rom-com. The years apart had matured us both. His graphic design career had flourished, and he developed a greater appreciation for passion over practicality. "I was wrong before," he admitted during our first catch-up dinner. "I told you to compromise your vision for security, but watching you build something true to yourself has been inspiring. I should have supported you better." Our relationship rekindled slowly, cautiously, but now there was a depth and understanding that had been missing. He understood my work ethic, my need to create on my own terms, and I appreciated his stability and thoughtfulness in ways my younger self had taken for granted. But the most profound change was internal. That confidence, sparked the night I finally stood up to my mother, grew stronger with each passing month. I no longer measured my worth by comparison to Sarah, or anyone else. I built a life that reflected my values, my vision. One where success was defined by creative integrity and personal fulfillment, not external metrics. This new self-assurance even allowed me to recognize that Sarah, too, had been a victim of Mom's expectations. Her perfect daughter role came with its own immense pressures. Our conversations revealed how she sometimes envied my artistic freedom, while feeling trapped by the very success that earned Mom's approval. Learning to forgive my mother, though, that was perhaps the hardest part. Not because she made a complete transformation, but because I finally understood that true forgiveness isn't about erasing the past, or pretending the hurt never happened. It's about releasing its power over your present and future. You don't forgive for the other person, my therapist had explained. You forgive for yourself, to free yourself from carrying the weight of resentment. This perspective helped me maintain boundaries, while still allowing our relationship to evolve. I learned to correct her when old patterns emerged, without it turning into an argument. I learned to appreciate her efforts, however imperfect, without needing her to become someone she might never fully be. The culmination of this year of growth came at the opening of my first solo exhibition, a collection exploring transformation and resilience through sustainable fashion. I invited my whole family, even extended relatives who'd previously regarded my career with polite confusion. The gallery was packed. Industry professionals, local artists, potential clients. Dad beamed, introducing himself as Daniela's dad. Sarah surprisingly expertly worked the room, promoting my creative business with her legal acumen. And then there was Mom, initially out of her element but making a visible effort to engage. To understand my world, I watched her from across the room, studying one of my signature pieces, a jacket blending repurposed vintage elements with modern structure. I approached slowly, giving her space. "What do you think?" I asked. She turned, studied my face, then looked back at the design. "It's beautiful," she said with surprising sincerity. "I don't understand all the technical aspects, but I can see it's special. The way you've transformed these older pieces into something new, while honoring their history. It's quite remarkable." I smiled, genuinely touched by her effort to see my work through appreciative eyes, not comparative ones. "I have something for you," I said, leading her to a separate piece. A redesigned vintage dress, elegant, with structural elements that echoed her classic style. "This is inspired by a photograph of you from your 20s, I explained. "Dad showed me pictures from when you were first dating. I thought you might like to have it." Mom stared at the garment, then reached out, touching the fabric with careful fingers. To my shock, her eyes welled up with tears. "You made this for me?" she asked, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "Yes," I nodded. "It's yours." She turned to me, emotion clear on her face. "You have such talent, Daniela. Such vision. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." "Thank you," I said, simply accepting the compliment and the implied apology. "I'm proud of you," she added. The words I'd waited decades to hear. "Proud of you for who you are, not for who I thought you should be." As she embraced me, somewhat awkwardly but with genuine feeling, I realized something. I had achieved something far more valuable than her approval. I had reached a place where I no longer needed it to validate my worth, though I could still appreciate it now as a gift freely given. Later that evening, as the exhibition wound down, I found a quiet moment. I thought about the journey. From that little girl desperately seeking approval, to the rebellious teenager, the struggling young artist, to the woman who finally found the courage to stand up and claim her own value. I didn't need to be as good as my sister. I only needed to be authentically myself. To honor my gifts, my vision. To create a life that reflected my unique perspective, not someone else's definition of success. Sometimes the most powerful act isn't achieving some external measure of greatness, but simply standing up and speaking your truth. Not to hurt others, but to free yourself from the limitations they've placed upon you. In that moment of standing, you discover that you've been enough all along.